So today we're going to be looking at HDR photography, high dynamic range. Dynamic range is the range of tonality that can be captured in a single image. So from the highlights, the brightest highlight, to the darkest shadow detail that can be captured in one image. High dynamic range extends that by taking multiple exposures. In your book, Photography, London, Stone and Upton, page 186, you can see and read through this page a little bit of background and history to the way photographers would manage high dynamic range settings and how to photograph those. And what we're going to be doing in this assignment is taking multiple exposures at one stop increments. And if on the right hand side of the page here you can see there's this center image here, and our start point for that will be taking an image representing 18% gray as 18% gray, or as near as you can get that, and then +1, +2, and then -1, -2. The one little tip is when you're changing the exposures when you're photographing, do it with the shutter speed and not with your aperture, so that you don't change the depth of field at all in these images. And they need to be in register, which means you need to shoot with a tripod as well. If you do a kind of Google image search, you'll see lots of kind of images out there taken with this kind of technique. And we're going to be looking at different ways that we could actually shoot and make adjustments in those images. Architectural photography is often the way that we think about high dynamic range and using high dynamic range, trying to get the detail from outside of a building as well as the interior and getting those balanced. But the trick is doing it in a way that doesn't look contrived or artificial. And I think there can be in our minds a line between images that have been taken as HDRs, looking like artistic pieces where it is obvious that you've done a treatment on the image, and then a much more subtle treatment, which actually has just increased the tonal range of the images that are taken. Right, so I need to see if I can find some example images here that we can look at. And I'm in Bridge right now, but these pictures taken of the waterfall on Hemlock Falls on one of our previous field trips that we've done here. We know that photographing waterfalls and water is notoriously difficult, as the highlights in the water itself can very easily get blown. And so a range of exposures here. This image, 18% as 18%, and then +1, +2, and then -1, -2 from that baseline exposure that we were looking at here. So the first thing to do will be finding a scene to photograph, and then once you've photographed, then get into Photoshop, and let's dive into Photoshop here and start looking at the technique that we're going to use to do this adjustment. Once you've actually taken the photographs, group the ones together that you're going to need to merge together in separate folders. And well, we were just looking at a moment ago, not there, in Bridge, that there's a folder here that has 5 images in it, and that's what we're going to need to be able to start. Once you've got your images in the folder, File, Automate, and down at the bottom here it says Merge to HDR Pro, and this little box is going to appear. We're going to browse the images and find the selection that we've got. I'd already kind of been looking at these images earlier, but you just find where the images are, and I'm going to highlight all of them and open, and Photoshop is going to do its magic where it's going to combine these images together. Once it's done that, then we need to go in further and make adjustments, and there's the fine-tuning that we'll need to do. So we'll give Photoshop a moment to pull things together. The wheels are turning. Okay, see if I can shrink this page down just a touch so that we can all see it. And So this is our image. It looks rather odd at the moment, and there are several presets that we could look at. And again, if we click on some of those, well, these were black and white images to start with, but the monochrome setting here gives you a preset. We can't look at the color ones in this image because it's already monochrome. But once we've got that, then we can use the settings at the bottom here to fine tune. And we can either use the sliders or we could use a curve tool. I'm going to use the sliders on this one, but you can easily use the curve tool as well. Image that we're looking at the moment, highlights are still blown. So let's try and bring the highlights down so that we get more detail in the highlights. Shadows, we may want to bring up more detail in the shadows. And so use the sliders. The vibrance slider, be very careful, very powerful, and it can very easily damage your image, and the saturation as well. You can easily overdo it in a color image. OK is right at the bottom here. Once you've decided on your finished combined image, and Photoshop will do its work, and you can resave that image after the fact. That's the basic technique that we're going to be looking at. And I think once you get started with the assignment, you're going to find it's a lot easier than you think to find things that are going to be interesting to photograph. So quick look at the assignment sheet before we kind of head off of the video. Of course, you've got this attached to your email. HDR, rustic building or old rotting car. Really look for textures. And I think as you look around, I'm asking you to do 6 wide views and 6 close-ups of these images. I think once you get started and seeing things to photograph, you'll be surprised that there are a lot of things out there that you could photograph that could be quite interesting. Look for a location that has a range of textures, rough textures in particular, and before photographing, try to imagine what it would have been like back when the location was bustling with life. So if it's an old car or an old building, try to imagine yourself standing or being in the location and photograph from this position to capture a sense of actually being there. Use this as an opportunity to let your creative juices flow and capture the following: 6 wide views, 6 close-up or detail images. Once you've found your photograph that you're going to do your HDR on, set your tripod up. You're going to need to take 5 exposures. The first exposure, 18% gray as 18% gray. The subsequent exposures, -1, -2, +1, +2. And for that, for each image, shoot 5 frames at full stop intervals, changing the shutter speed and not the aperture setting so that you don't impact the depth of field. So that when these images combine and register together, they work together. You're going to need your SLR kit. Your tripod is an absolute must, and then access to a computer with Adobe Photoshop. If HDR photography is something you really get into, then there are other softwares out there that you can use. But just as a starting point, Photoshop is going to be a fine place to start, so we don't need to worry further about that. If you do get into architectural photography and you want to think about using HDRs for that, other blending modes are probably going to be a better way to go. And even using the layer mask technique that we've done a lot of already is probably going to be a preferred method for blending images together for architectural photography. Nonetheless, the basic technique of shooting, bracketing your exposures, making sure that you've got the range of tonality available to you is going to be important. Indeed, with architectural photography, getting white balance correct from interiors that may be lit with artificial lighting, tungsten lighting, and then the exteriors blending together, the white balance is another area that we could think about. Make sure you read that chapter, or that single page actually, 186 in your main book, London Stone and Upton book on photography. Okay, look at the email, and that should give any additional details for the day. All right.